Hello everyone. In this series of video lectures, I'm going to discuss the section of Come Thou Tortoise that you were assigned to read for this week, roughly from page 50 to page 100. This series of video lectures is going to begin with a primary video lecture that will summarize the text that you had to read, as was requested by students in our interactive classes. Then, in the next series of video lectures, I'll begin to break down and analyze those first few chapters in order to tie together some of the central themes that we are going to be considering throughout this work and that we began to establish in our first interactive class. Remember that in the context of this Caring Milieu course, we're using this text as a window into a number of different issues, such as the process of grieving, the experience of individuals who are differently abled or who have exceptionalities, like Audrey, our narrator herself. By examining these central subjects of cultural differences and, let's say, ableism, and also the experience of death and the ways in which people approach the unavoidable realities of death and deal with it after the fact, are going to drive most of our conversations about the work this week and as we go forward. In terms of what has transpired in this section of the novel, we begin these first 50 pages with a flashback to the young Audrey Flowers as a child with her father in his laboratory, as he is running experiments on various different mice. Now, there are a series of miscommunications between the two characters, as Audrey confuses euthanize, as in euthanasia, killing one of these experimental mice that Walter Flowers is using for his forced swim test, with the idea of euthanizing in a pun, as in youth, youthful, or young. So she believes that Walter Flowers is going to take this mouse and, well, make it younger, because that's what his experiments are all about, isn't it? He's trying to find some way to combat aging or to overcome aging entirely and render human beings immortal through genetic manipulation and engineering. Obviously, that's a fanciful and far-off possibility, if it's even possible at all, but that's her confusion. And Walter gives in to her request to be allowed to keep this mouse that fails the forced swim test, that doesn't even try to swim and doesn't even try to struggle to survive. After that point, Audrey wakes up and speaks to her Uncle Toby, who we, of course, know from the end of the novel is not actually her biological uncle, although she's not aware of it. She thinks that Uncle Toby is her father's brother, but is in fact the homosexual partner of her father. Audrey describes an extensive dream that she's had to her uncle, which introduces a number of different unique terms that are shared between members of the family. For instance, Audrey describes dreams or refers to dreams as montages. In the next chapter, Winifred begins to discuss Chuck and Linda, her caregivers at this moment, and there's a moment in which Chuck begins to recite or rehearse for a performance of a Shakespeare play. In the next chapter, Uncle Toby leaves and goes to the airport in order to pick up Toph, and Audrey spends the next several chapters waiting for their return. As she does so, she recalls her IQ test, having received it as a younger girl. At the time, she was convinced that this IQ test that was provided to her by Golem, or God of Light and Eternal Mercy, which was just the acronym for the educational institution that she attended, was high because her IQ, she thought, was a score from 0 to 100. And so her IQ score, possibly in the 80s or 90s, seemed impressive to her until, unwittingly, her father and her Uncle Toby revealed to her that, well, no, that's actually a very poor IQ score, relatively speaking. In the ensuing chapters, Audrey attempts to distract herself from some of the concerns that are roiling in her heart as she shovels the driveway and interacts with a few of her different neighbors, including Burn Doyle. Those interactions lead her to another flashback wherein she recalls her grandmother and Toph, who she thinks was just her father's good friend from England, where he grew up, but is in fact Walter Flowers' brother. As she describes this visit, she frames these two characters as, in essence, the villains of the story that she's telling. her comments about their relationship with her father and the influence that they have on Uncle Toby, cast in the light of villainous action, are going to be the subject of some of our conversations in our interactive class. In the next video, I'm going to start unpacking segments of this text and give you an overview of the overarching thematic commentary that it offers on the subjects of grief, loss, and memory.